start, just explain who you are and what you do.
I'm a professor in environmental sciences here at SIUE. I'm actually an assistant professor. I've been here for 2.5 years, and my research is real focused on how do pollutants and other things in our surrounding environment, how much do we get exposed to them personally? So, like, how much air pollution might we be getting exposed to, or how much soil contamination might we be getting exposed to, or
So
things
with
like that.
environmental issues, you are more worried about the human health aspect.
Yes, that's my research is more focused. So, in terms of environmental health science is the study of how things in our environment affect our health, and so part of that is studying whether we're having health problems, but part of it is also studying whether we're getting exposed to things that affect our health. And I'm more focused on the how much are we getting exposed to the things that could affect our health.
So what is your education, expertise, and experience?
So I have a master's of science in zoology, where I focused on the ecology of the environment. And then I have a PhD in the field I was just talking about. It's called environmental health science. It's how does things in our environment affect our health. And I've worked in the environmental science field in addition to getting these degrees. I've worked in that field for about 20 years, including the 2 years here at SIUE. So I did a bunch of education, and I also have about 2 decades of work experience. Most of my work experience is more focused on problems of how certain regions are contaminated by different kind of pollutants that we polluted the environments back in the past, and the contaminant patterns that we have now. Here at SIUE and in my PhD, I've been real focused on what I was talking about monitoring how much of the contamination there is in order to determine how much people are going to be exposed to it.
Okay. Do you think climate change plays a role in human health problems such as the ones you're testing or experiments on?
So climate change definitely has impacts to human health. It's different from the types of impacts I'm talking about, which are contamination and things like that. Now, climate change, when you think about how climate change is going to affect things, what you're really talking about is how does the increase in temperature and the more variable weather, right, the higher rate of storms and other severe weather events, how do these two things that result from climate change, how are they going to affect all of the processes that affect the world, humans, animals, plants, everything like that. And so for a lot of questions, the question of how is climate change going to affect it, the answer is actually really complicated and difficult to predict. So like what I'm talking about with pollution, how much pollution people are exposed to, how climate change is going to affect that. And I'm talking about local pollution, the kinds that do things like cause cancer and stuff like that. That's a very difficult problem to answer. It's hard to answer that, and there are people who are trying to answer it, but I don't do that research area. But I think an easier thing to know is the direct consequences of increases in temperature and increases in variability of weather patterns. So we've seen, a variety of hurricanes happening, in the kind of, in the past couple of years, the past 10 years or so, the various hurricanes that have been hitting the southern United States, and the big one that hit Puerto Rico and stuff like that. Now, it is well established that one of the results of climate change is more extreme weather events. And so the likelihood is that as we have increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, increases in temperature, changes in climate patterns, we're going to end up having more of these kinds of hurricanes happening in the southeastern United States, right? And so with hurricanes, right, you have damage to infrastructure, you have, so hospitals may be, out of commission for a period of time. They may even get destroyed, or there may just be, lack of electricity for periods of time. So as you can imagine, right, there may be differences in terms of people's access to good health care and stuff like that. And these may be temporary. It may be a week or a couple of days, or it could be longer depending on how severe the damage is. Imagine someone in Puerto Rico who's in a real remote area, then it got hit by this massive hurricane. It might end up being harder for them to get to a hospital if they need to, or even just to get to their doctor. So all those types of things kind of are going to add up and affect health. And it comes back to climate change. How much it's going to affect it is hard to predict, because it's hard to predict the future.
Right. So you're saying, from what I understand, is like climate change it's complicated and has more of like an indirect effect on a lot of health problems as well as the direct problems that it.
Well, I'm saying that there's both.
Right.
So the other thing, right, is if you have increases in temperature in areas that are already really hot, then you're going to have more people having like heat-related illnesses. People, when the temperatures go too high, more people die. And so obviously, if we're changing the climate so there's going to be more extreme temperatures, in certain areas, more people are going to die. So I would say that's pretty direct.
What do you think are some of the causes of climate change, and do you think it's a lot of it is human caused?
Well, by definition, if we talk about like global warming and global climate change, that's defined as increase in temperatures, an increase in variability in weather as a result of human activities, right? So that's my understanding anyway. And I'm not a researcher in this field, but when the term global warming, the term global climate change, those terms are specifically as a result of the increased carbon and methane and other gases that we're emitting into the atmosphere through human activities. So, a lot of the kind of, when people try to dismiss the idea of it happening, which is, by the way, most of that work is funded by organizations with particular political agendas where they kind of want to keep doing certain things that are profitable for them. A lot of the things they talk about is, the climate always changes historically, right? It's like, it's natural climate changes. But when global climate change is discussed, it's more, talk about the patterns that actually have occurred since humans have been so important in how we impact the world. So starting, the early 20th century, we started burning massive amounts of fuel, coal, oil, stuff like that. And during the time that it's been recorded, the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have increased. And it's not a mystery that burning fuel leads to higher levels of carbon dioxide, right? It's just kind of, you burn fuel and it gets released. So it's kind of like saying, well, I have a bigger salary, I got a big pay raise, right? I got a $20,000 a year pay raise. Well, I didn't, I wish I did. And wow, look at this, my bank account has more money in it. But maybe my bank account has more money in it for some other reason. Maybe it's my wife spending less or whatever. It's like, well, You get a pay raise, it's going to lead to more money going into your bank account. It's not really that confusing.
Right. Do you see any important environmental issues that go unnoticed? Because we hear about climate change all the time, obviously. Is there something like more specific that may be a bigger problem that we should focus on?
Are these your questions?
Yeah, it is. Why?
Oh, because that one, it kind of sounds like it's like, do you feel like we're paying too much attention to climate change?
No, I'm just trying to, because you hear about climate change all the time, and it's like a talking point, like, oh, the global warming, but there's a lot of problems with the environment going on, but a lot of it has to do with climate change at the same time.
But I guess, I would turn the question around and say, well, we hear about climate change all the time. Are we doing anything about it?
That's true.
And I would say that's the problem that's going unnoticed. Because our as a society, we're doing almost nothing about it.
So, kind of going on that point, so how would you say America and the world has dealt with climate change issues overall?
For the most part, we've ignored it. We've talked about it a lot. There have been some policy efforts to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time, due to good things like economic growth and people's increased access to natural resources, improved quality of life, due to these good things and also due to some bad things, various kind of economic interests that just are trying to make more money. Whatever efforts we've globally made to try to reduce carbon emissions have been counterbalanced by the fact that we're still emitting more and more, So, I know that in the U.S., as a nation, we've basically done, we've been increasing our carbon emissions, and we've done, as far as policy goes, almost nothing to control it.
Do you have like a future outlook, like how you think like we might deal with this in the future if things are looking good, like people are finally starting to realize what's going on? Do you think this will be a problem that gets solved?
I think this is a problem that will not get solved. I think chances are we are going to increase global temperatures by 1 to 4 degrees overall. Again, it's not my area of expertise, so there are models that forecast what's going to happen, and that's going to lead to very dramatic economic, environmental, and health impacts to many parts of the world, especially areas that are already kind of more equatorial, areas that are more poor, areas that have issues with access to resources and stuff like that. There is some an argument could be made, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I think it's quite possible that, for example, what we're seeing happening in Syria right now, but that's driven in part by lack of access to water and food. That's part of what's caused, the war in Syria. And I'm not an expert on politics, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but those types of changes, it's possible have some relationship with climate change that's already been happening, because it's been documented that's already happening, leading to more kind of war and strife. So I think, so that even if we reduced our amount that we're releasing now, we've still got plenty in there, and we don't know what the impact of what's already in the atmosphere. The polar ice caps and Greenland ice cap, they're already melting. So we still don't know exactly what's going to happen just from what we've done now. So even if we stopped it now, it would still get significantly more changes. But it doesn't look like we're on the path to stopping it. It's just continuing. So a lot's going to happen. It's not going to be good.
So what would be your solution to stopping it?
I don't have a solution. I'm not an expert in climate change. I'd love to have a solution, but I don't. If we're very lucky as a society, someone will come up with some kind of technology that will somehow suck back all of the carbon that's already in the atmosphere. That would be a great solution. But
yeah, I played a video game on my phone. It was like Terra Nova Planet or something.
Yeah.
You had to like terraform a planet, and then there's like you had to get different equipment that like sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And puts oxygen.
Yeah.
It was so yeah. I think that
yeah.
actually could possibly happen.
There's a researcher from Princeton named Stephen Pacala, who has decades ago wrote a book about all these different possible things that would need to be done in order to reduce the emissions. You can kind of look at that. You can also look at the International Panel on Climate Change and see what they talk about for solutions. But unfortunately, saying what the solutions are is not something that I'm qualified to do, and I would be arrogant to think otherwise. I don't think it's arrogant to say, yeah, we're impacting the climate. It's not arrogant to say that if you cook eggs, you make an omelet,